Shiki Granbell is a great main character. I don't care what the fairy tale haters say about him, I don't care what the Eden Zero haters say about him, I don't even care how he starts out. Right now, Shiki is a perfectly good shonen protagonist. He might not be the best, but he's definitely a lot better than people outside the Eden Zero fanbase give him credit for. That's why in this video, I want to debunk 2 common myths about Shiki and discuss what makes him a great main character. As you can imagine, there will be some minor spoilers for those of you who are still sleeping on Eden Zero. But before I get started, make sure to comment with your thoughts on Shiki. I'll pick my favorite and share it as comment of the week in the next video. This week's comment goes to Eric, who asked if there's an anime that continued past its manga. If you'd like more Eden Zero and other manga discussions like this one, then make sure to subscribe and follow along with each week's video. Now, before I go any further, I should admit that yes, I actually thought Shiki was a pretty basic character before I got deep into Eden Zero. You do have to admit that he is a tad bit generic in the earlier parts of the story. He likes to fight, he likes to protect his friends, and he didn't really have any unique motivations until the story started to really develop. However, as most fans of the series will tell you, Shiki sees more of the world as the story goes on, and we watch him grow as a character and as a leader. But of course, this doesn't stop people from slandering Eden Zero and its characters. And while I could do a whole video on how most of these takes are pretty shallow, I think it's worth focusing on Shiki specifically because a lot of people were like me and agreed with these takes at a very, and I mean very, basic level in the beginning of the story. Now, the first take is one that still makes me cringe whenever I see it, even though I'm well aware of the fact that it's just plain wrong. You've seen it before from people who take one look at Eden Zero and think they've got it all figured out. This is the claim that Shiki, according to some people, is literally just Natsu. The ironic thing about this take is that if you go around saying this, then it pretty much tells everyone you've barely read past the first chapter. First of all, a lot of people who push this idea usually only do it because of the designs of the 2 characters. Obviously they look similar, but you can just as easily point out the differences in their designs. Shiki's eyes are a bit more rounded out than Natsu's. Natsu has his scarf while Shiki has his back ribbon thingies. Then, while they both have spiky hair, Shiki's looks a bit softer and his bangs kinda sit in front of his face, while Natsu's hair looks much spikier and his bangs are kinda parted to the sides. And I'm sure there's a few more differences that you guys can figure out. Point being that yes, their designs are very similar, but it's the same author taking what worked before and giving it a spin. There is absolutely no rule that says an author needs to completely abandon what he did in a previous work in order to be original. And that's really what people are getting at when they try to say that Shiki is just Natsu. They're trying to criticize Eden Zero before they even read it by making a surface level observation and assuming Mashima just recycles his characters. Now, to be fair, this is more so the case with Happy and the so-called LC Crimson. Like, yeah, Mashima has repurposed characters, notoriously so in the case of the character most people would recognize as Jelal, but it's definitely awkward when you read the first chapter of Eden Zero and you're like, oh hey, that's definitely Happy from Fairy Tail. And then later on when you're like, okay, so this is 100% Erza Scarlet dressed as a pirate? That I'll give to you. But to say that Shiki is literally just Natsu completely ignores any of the differences in their designs. It also ignores the differences in their personalities. Cause here's the thing, right? The whole design issue is understandable, to an extent. But if you're someone who takes that one step further and tries to say that Shiki is a clone of Natsu, then you're just being plain ignorant. The personalities are similar, but there are just as many differences. In fact, this is probably where there's more differences between Natsu and Shiki. First of all, Shiki is a lot friendlier than Natsu, while Natsu, for a lack of a better word, tends to be kind of feral. Also, Shiki is more of a leader. Natsu certainly has his moments, but his guildmates don't necessarily look to him for direction. I'm not even trying to say anything bad about Natsu. In fact, there's plenty to like more about Natsu than Shiki. Natsu doesn't cry as much as Shiki, and Shiki, at least in the beginning, is definitely a bigger perv than Natsu. All I'm trying to get at is that there's plenty of distinction between the characters. So if you're trying to say that Shiki is just a recycled version of Natsu, then it kinda just shows how lazy you are more than anything else. And that's on you, not me, not your friends, not anybody else. But now that I've gone on my tangent about Shiki and Natsu, I think it's time we talked about the second take I see people use. This is the claim that Shiki is just another shonen protagonist. And to be fair, this one actually has some merit to it because, like I said, Shiki does start out kinda basic. But that's partly due to his being the main character, because, as is the case with stories in general, the main character tends to be the least interesting person in the main cast. Let me put it this way. I doubt that Frodo is your favorite character from The Lord of the Rings. And this is kinda how I felt about Shiki. As much as I thought that he was an okay character, I couldn't help but feel like he kinda just did what any other shonen protagonist would do. And before I keep going, I should probably explain what I mean by that. See, when someone uses the old "just another shonen protagonist" line, they usually mean one of two things. First, they might mean that the protagonist is a pretty flat character who really doesn't grow throughout the story. Second, they might mean that they follow the same path as other shonen protagonists from earlier manga. So they either want to get stronger and be the pirate, ninja, whatever king, or they're a good boy who almost always does good boy things like crying or protecting their friends. And this is kinda how I felt about Shiki in the earlier parts of Eden Zero. To be fair, there are a ton of details about Shiki that you can love right away. There's his ether gear, the way he treats everyone equally, or just any of the moments where he and Homura share exactly one brain cell. But aside from that, I couldn't help but feel like some of his moments where he was supposed to be cool kinda just felt forced. For example, there's this one scene where Shiki protects this bratty beekeeper from a mercenary, but when she comes right out and asks Shiki to save her, he basically tells her to go piss off, and then he says that he's only doing it to stop the mercenary. That right there would have been a perfectly cool scene, but then Shiki follows it up with the line about how helping people is the first step towards connecting one heart to another. It's like, yeah, it works and it's in his character, but it just feels like it was thrown in there because Shiki is supposed to be a good boy type character who cares about friendship. It's not bad writing per se, it just feels a bit done and makes it harder to view Shiki as a unique character. But the good news is that this only happens in the earlier parts of the story. As the story progresses, Shiki grows from being the typical shonen protagonist, and shows us how he can be a unique character. Like I mentioned earlier, one way he does this is by acting as a leader. As Shiki gathers more crewmates, you're able to watch him lead and inspire the other characters. Partly because of the way he treats everyone as an equal, regardless of their background. Eden Zero takes place in a world full of hate and discrimination, and a lot of the characters have suffered as a result of it. So when you have someone like Shiki who's able to help others see the value in their life, or even just let them know that it's okay to be vulnerable, it really does present him as a charismatic character. And the great part about Shiki's leadership is that he doesn't just say these things to say them. If you're a manga fan, then you'll remember one of the more recent chapters where it was Shiki's turn, where he was vulnerable. He needed to back up what he told his friends about being strong and pressing on, and that's exactly what he did. Shiki was hurting, but he realized that he needed to accept what had happened and move on for the sake of his friends. Now, another thing that helps Shiki stand out is the way he doesn't just want to be friends with someone no matter what. In the most recent arc, Shiki fights the villain Shura, who is just a terrible person in every sense of the word. He uses women like they aren't even human, he treats androids like they're cheap toys, and half the crap he does is purely out of spite. Which, you know, to be honest, kudos to Shura, because who doesn't love a little poetic justice? But at the same time, he did take it just a little too far. Point being, the guy's a dick, and even someone as friendly as Shiki can see that. So when Shura asks Shiki to be his friend, Shiki refuses because Shura is someone he's fundamentally opposed to. And this shows that Shiki is an individual, someone with unique values. Unlike a generic protagonist that would try to be friends with everyone, Shiki acts according to his morals by standing against Shura and calling him out on his twisted view of the world. Not because it's necessarily the right thing to do, and not just because Shura is hurting people, but because it's something Shiki personally believes in. By this point, it should be easy to see what makes Shiki a great protagonist. He's a leader, he grows alongside the characters and learns from them, and he acts based on his personal values. Now, is he the best protagonist? No. And could he be better? Absolutely. But to try and slander his character and say he's recycled, flat, generic, whatever, completely ignores all the beautiful storytelling that takes place in Eden Zero. He probably won't be your favorite, but once you give Eden Zero a chance, it should be clear why Shiki Granbell is a great shonen protagonist. And that's it for this discussion. If you enjoyed this discussion, then make sure to like the video. Also make sure to comment with your thoughts down below. And if you'd like more Eden Zero and other manga discussions like this one, then make sure to subscribe and follow along with each week's video. Thank you for watching, and I hope to hear from you soon.